Good evening, welcome. My name is Ruth Goldway, and I am Casey Shearer's mother and the person who's been generally overseeing the Casey Shearer Lecture and Writing Awards programs for the last 20 years. When we had to cancel last year's event, the 20th anniversary of the Casey Lectures, it was the first event on the Brown campus that had to be canceled as a result of the pandemic. Yet we never thought that we would still be apart here in April of 2021. It's heartening that we've been able to figure out a way to communicate nevertheless. And I am so pleased that we have wonderful writers yet again to recognize and to reward. This year's writers have touched on some of the issues that Casey touched on when he wrote. And when I read these kinds of things, I think, well, Casey's circle of influence continues to grow. Not just that he's able to encourage writers to write, but also to think deeply and with some humor about the lives they live and the state of the world we're in. I want to say a special hello to the personal friends and family members who are part of Casey's Circle and who have been supporters of this program every year that we've done it. I know you're out there and in the ether and sharing our pride and also our everlasting sadness. I hope to see everyone next year. I hope to be able to once again personally thank the Writing Awards winners, to include them personally in the growing Casey Circle, and to make this program as personally touching as it's always been. Yet, for now, we have the special opportunity of letting the students who've won actually read their papers, and for those of you in the audience to talk to them directly. It's a special opportunity. I want to thank Beth Taylor, who was Casey's mentor and who was the founder of the Nonfiction Writing Awards program at Brown. I want to thank the amazing staff at Brown who've put all of these events together, including this special one. I want to congratulate Mariana Scott and Angie Kang. I want to tell everyone that we hope next year we will see you in person and that hopefully President Clinton will join us to make a special celebration of Casey's then 22nd anniversary event. And I want you to know that I am certain that Casey is zooming in tonight.
Welcome, everybody. And thank you for being here for this very special event with our honored guests, the winners of this year's Casey Shearer Awards for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction. As you know, these awards honor the memory of Casey Shearer, one of the best writers in our first creative nonfiction class at Brown in 1998. You can find Casey's canon of essays and columns on the Casey Shearer website. As always, I want to send a heartfelt hello to Casey's family and their friends. We are particularly grateful to Casey's parents, Ruth Goldway and Derek Shearer, for creating and generously funding the Casey Shearer Memorial Awards for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction. For more than 20 years now, Casey's legacy has been felt at Brown as students from all disciplines, encouraged by these awards, find training in the writing of journalism, the many forms of creative nonfiction, and the academic essay through our nonfiction writing program. Former winners of the Shearer Awards are now working as nationally significant authors, journalists, teachers, and doctors who write. You can find their biographies on the Casey Shearer website. Also, all the Shearer Award winners' pieces and those of tonight's winners are posted on Prospect, the webzine of Brown's best undergraduate creative nonfiction. Now I would like to introduce the winners of this year's Casey Shearer Memorial Awards for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction. Each of them will read for you their award-winning piece. First, we will hear the second place Casey Shearer Memorial Award for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction. It goes to Angie Kang, a senior concentrating in literary arts. The title of her piece is This Place We Call Home.
This place we call home. This past spring break, I didn't go home. Hey Angie, I'm going to Aldi's to stock up. Need anything? I'm good, thanks. In fact, I probably won't for a while. Where are the face masks? On the fridge. Thanks. It's strange. I've always gone back to California for spring break. As much as I love Providence, and I really do, by spring, I always find myself needing to be home. My mom always came inside the airport to pick me up. Angie, Balbal, over here. For some reason, I never let on how happy I was to see her. Dad's in the car. I figured. I'm not sure why. Need any help, Balbal? I'm good, thanks. For the first 10 years of my life, I moved around a bit. Not as much as some kids, but more than many. So today is Angie's last day with us. She's going to finish second grade in California. Yes, Eric? Where's that? Well, I can show you. It's this long one at the edge. Lower. Right here? Yeah. By the time we settle down for good, Mama says there are lots of people like me over there. Like how? Like Chinese. I had exhausted my original green card and I was on my way to becoming a citizen. Cool. Okay, Angie, Eric, let's get back to class now. I came to America as a baby, so I consider Utah my first home. My mother was getting her master's in piano. Our house was filled with music. We lived in university housing in Salt Lake City. I don't remember the address. Instead, what I remember, the winters. We left Utah when my mom graduated. That is to say, it was temporary. When I was 6, we moved to 2 Maxwell Drive, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Mom, I'm hungry. We're nearly there, Balbal. I thought it was the prettiest house ever. But this too, temporary. 2 years later, we moved across the country to Cupertino, California. Wake up, Balbal. Mom? It took me a while to appreciate the architecture. Why do the walls look like mud? We lived there the longest. What really ties the room together is a nice coat of paint. Orange is fun, fresh, and open. Don't be afraid to try it. More after the break. Next up, House Hunters. It was the closest place to ours I could remember. And still... Balbal? Angie, what are you doing? We're only renting. I was constantly reminded that it didn't belong to us. Thank God it's water soluble. And I never forgot that. For 5 years, we went house hunting every weekend. So this place has 2 bed and 2 bath. Don't forget to ask about there's enough space. Can we get a dog, Mom? We'll see. Sometimes it was fun. Mostly it was a chore. Welcome. Please put on the shoe covers to protect the carpeting. I learned a lot by wandering off on my own, like where to hide imperfection. We mostly kept to open houses in Cupertino, but in 2009, towns that used to be out of our budget became fair game. I don't want to switch schools. We're only looking. Give it a chance. And who knows, you might love the house. Yeah. Well, what great light. So as you can see, above us is a nice skylight in the hallway. I loved it. And here's the second bedroom. Mama, I gotta pee right now. Okay, go. I crept into a bathroom and marked my territory. I'd always feared public restrooms. Public meant anywhere not home. Just squat to pee, but it'll get on the seat. I got it from my mom. What if the other people have already? I couldn't sit straight down on the toilet seat. If there wasn't a seat cover, I would use toilet paper, but that wasn't ideal. The prospect of slipping was just unacceptable. My comfort there told me the house would soon be ours. We moved in November 2010. Once, in Providence, the plastic seat on my toilet was loose. I tried replacing the bolts, but the screws were not any standard size. It's larger than 3/8 inch, smaller than 1/2 inch. I texted my landlord to see where I could buy those particular size screws. I had no idea what he looked like, but based on his lack of text, he may not even have existed. I told my mom about the toilet seat one evening. But yeah, it's not really a problem, just annoying. Have you asked your Deidre about it yet? My what? Deidre? David? The man you pay to live in your apartment? My landlord? Why did I always think Deidre was a swear word? Deidre! Hey, don't say that where Angie can hear. Ignore that Deidre, Baba. Watch it. Mom, Dad, stop it. Deidre, boy, Deidre. No clue where you got that idea. Deidre, well, it's more of an insult, really. The Chinese see landlords as greedy and evil. And, I mean, some were, I'm sure, but the socialists brainwashed everyone. Wasn't Granddad a landlord? Oh yeah, and he paid dearly for it. In the Cultural Revolution, villages were expected to make examples of landlords. But if the village knew and liked their landlord, the villages looked the other way. Your grandfather had just come home from university. He had no connections. He also wasn't social or even particularly friendly. The people weren't all cruel, but they did need to show that they were faithful to the revolution, and your grandfather was an easy target. They put him on stage and made him wear a sign and tall cone hat. They would shout and jeer and shame him. Can you imagine, Baba? His own neighbors. This happened often. One day, the crowd lost control. Your grandfather almost died. They cut his stomach open and his colon nearly came out. My cousin put him in a cart and ran 7 miles to the nearest hospital in Xi'an. It took him a full year to recover. Sorry. I didn't know how to comfort her. There was a distance, both physical and generational, that demanded a comfort I didn't know how to offer. Your grandmother always cried when she told me that story. Where was I? Oh, when they did that to your grandmother was 3 months pregnant with me. With my father injured and disgraced, she was the only support for the family. The communists had a point system. If you worked a whole day, you would get enough points to feed one person. It was in the name of fairness, but was it fair for 8 people to live on one person's labor? Was it fair for us to starve? Wait, 8 people? Yes, 8 people. So that would be my grandmother. She took care of us when my dad was sick or in prison, and my mom was in the fields. When I was little, every time I got sick with a fever, I would wake up screaming. She would be the one who was there for me. She would tell me not to be afraid. My mother, of course. Her name was Yi Jia, and she was 40 when she was carrying me. She did everything, even made and dyed the clothes on our backs. I still miss her dearly. Xiangqi, my second eldest brother, 4 years older than I. He never had enough to eat, and he was always seeking attention. Shi Yu, my eldest sister, 14 years older than I. She was like a second mother, feeding and taking care of me when Grandma passed away. She was the tallest and most beautiful. I always thought she could be a model. We were still very close. Xiangwu, my eldest brother, 7 years older than I. He was constantly complaining and would always hurt my parents' feelings. We're not very close these days. My father, Junwei, he joined us at night after he recovered. He's easily the most intelligent man I've ever met. He tried to get my brothers to love reading, but never succeeded, so then he taught me instead. Hui Feng, my second eldest sister, 11 years older than I. She was detailed and sensitive, always averse to decision-making. Hui Feng was kind and aware of everyone's feelings at all times. And me, eventually, in '69, the tail end of the Cultural Revolution. My siblings faced the roughest times, but even in '69, our family was still perpetually hungry. So, why did they decide to have you during that time? Oh no, I was an accident. No need to tiptoe around the matter. Chinese people are very open about all this. Your grandmother never tried to hide that they weren't ready for me. They even tried to get rid of me at first. I don't blame them. Also, sorry about the noise. I'm boiling water for noodles. What was I saying? Oh, right. My mom didn't want me to suffer. She always cried when talking about this, but she couldn't get an abortion. Why? The Red Soldiers were always around the house. The Red Soldiers? You never learned about that. Just tell me, Mama. The Red Soldiers were kids, mostly teenagers from poor families who wanted revenge, but some from rich ones too, who rejected their parents and their wealth. Both boys and girls did it. That's one good thing from the Cultural Revolution, a new sense of equality of the sexes. You can still see that now in China. Anyway, the Red Soldiers harassed the terrible rich people, and when the Red Soldiers ran out of those, they attacked the kind rich ones, like my family. They were young and believed, well, anything. It was crazy how long it went on and how widespread it was. You'd step into a primary school and everyone was in uniform. Oh, my water. Sorry, give me a sec. Okay. Anyway, what I'm getting at is my mom still couldn't abort me. Still. Yeah, Yijia, I have a question for you. There were other options. Have you considered selling your unborn child? A neighbor had heard my mom was having a daughter. We have our 2 boys, but Zhaonan and I have always wanted a little girl. We have less mouths to feed and more workers. She would be happy with us. Please just consider it, okay? My mom thought about it all day, but she couldn't bear imagining watching her child grow up next door. Did you decide? I just can't, Chenyu. I'm so sorry. But her family was still poor and hungry and scared. Yuck! Don't we have anything else to eat? Ow! She still had to do something. Children don't fight. Don't you know how hard Mama works for us? But it's gross. Shut up, Xiangwu. Be grateful we have anything at all. So she thought that maybe it would be easier to give me to a family farther away. My mom found a couple in a village over who couldn't biologically have a child. She thought that this way her daughter could eat. This way her entire family could survive, even if we had to be apart. Arrangements were made. She steeled her resolve. Then, March 5th, 1969, I was born in a barn. My mom told me that when I was born, everyone was in tears. You can't sell my sister! But they didn't give you up after all. What changed Grandma's mind? A pot of water, actually. Dad went to heat some tea up for Mom, but while the water was boiling there over the fire, the pot split cleanly in half. The water flooded the family like a baptism. Ayah! To this day, no one really knows why. There's no scientific explanation. My parents took it as a sign. We need to keep this child, no matter what. If we die together. Oh, cheer up, Bao. We all stayed together for a good long time. We lived in the barn together. Actually, I call it a stable. Yes, we all lived together in a stable. The main house was seized by the Red Soldiers. It became the storage room for the communists. It held grain, seeds, wheat, etc. It was always locked, and only the leader of the village had a key. I saw the interior for the first time in my life when I was 11 years old. This building would have been the main kitchen. These would have been the guest rooms, the mill room, the stable or barn I was born in, the chicken house, the goat house, the garden, which was really a tiny plot of saving grace. We grew corn, greens, and sweet yams. My mom couldn't produce breast milk. Luckily, my aunt sent over a goat for me. It had already nursed her child, my cousin, and it saved my life too. When I had weaned off the milk, we sent her back to nurse yet another baby. Ah, that old girl. Nursed and raised 3 babies total. Isn't that just the wildest thing? Amazing. We all loved our goats so much. Our restroom was a sort of outhouse. It was a ways away and outside, but it wasn't enclosed. Just a wall around a row of ditches. No ceiling or roof to speak of, thank God. It already smelled like death. You get used to it, though, and you learn how to hold your breath. Farther down this way was the pig's trough. Mama, why is it that you grew up pooping in a ditch, but you can't sit on a toilet in a public restroom? Well, didn't you say so yourself? Those bathrooms are public. This old ditch might have been filthy, but it was ours. We knew where we'd been, what was in our, waste. You'll never know in public, though. My parents didn't like talking about what they had lost. They were also afraid we would tell people and the communists would get word of it. Oh, they were always looking for reasons to get mad. If they sensed that anyone was at all discontent with the way things were, it was not good. Now, of course, the house is ours again. Well, the land. My second oldest brother demolished the old wooden structure and rebuilt it. But Baba, I wish you could have seen our old house in all its glory. The Red Soldiers ransacked it before I was born. School kids taking our home. It had been ours since 1920. They took the furniture, pots, pans, everything we needed to survive on a daily basis. And that included all our books, my grandfather's calligraphy. They considered anything traditional as a cultural limitation. They burned it all. Was anything salvaged? Ha! My mom was uneducated. She didn't know the worth of those things. Even if she had, she probably still wouldn't have tried. If they caught her, they would have killed her. And Grandpa? Dad was in prison at the time of the raid. When he returned, there was nothing left to come back to, except, of course, the family. Watching her now, things started to make more sense. My mom always had a fascination with home improvement. Growing up, I had always watched HGTV with her. The two of us were never interested in things like feng shui, only the aesthetics of interior decor. Once we move this couch, we'll have a room for a love seat. And the philosophy of consumerism. To clarify, we were never hoarders. We always kept tidy and clean. There was a period of time where it seemed we tried to crowd out the desire for our own home by owning more. I left behind the mindset when I had to leave most of my stuff to go to college. My mom, though, hasn't. Now my parents don't have a landlord. That means every time I come home, just wait till you see the bathroom upstairs. We retiled it and the walls are lighter. Really opens up the room. I also bought some new... The house is different in some way. Aren't you going to look, Baba? I'm always grumpy about it. Yeah, I will later. I get it now. She's never known luxury in China, so she came to this United States hoping she could find her own. Mama, where did my books go? Maybe the typical American dream to want to own a home, but my mom's American dream wasn't so much American as it was just a dream. They're in there, just hidden. They don't match the walls. Papa, I gotta go. The noodle soup is done. Your dad and I are gonna have dinner now. Oh, okay, I should sleep anyways. Good night, Mama. Love you. Missing the last spring break meant that this was the longest I had gone without seeing my parents. The only blood relations I'd ever be comfortable calling family. The last time I went back to California, it was winter. How are you not cold? It's 60 degrees, Mama. Let's get inside. My mom had cleaned the house and bought a new duvet for me. Do you like it, Bubba? It's itchy. Still, that night, tucked under that scratchy blanket, in this place I call home, I had the best sleep I've had in a very long time.
Thank you, Angie. And now, the first place Casey Shearer Memorial Award for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction goes to Mariana Scott, a senior concentrating in physics. The title of her piece is Leonard and Peter.
Leonard and Peter. What did F mean by advising me to go down on a saint? What is a saint? A saint is someone who has achieved a remote human possibility. It is impossible to say what that possibility is. I think it has something to do with the energy of love. Contact with this energy results in the exercise of a kind of balance in the chaos of existence. A saint does not dissolve the chaos. If he did, the world would have changed long ago. It is a kind of balance that is his glory. Something in him so loves the world that he gives himself to the laws of gravity and chance. He is at home in the world. He can love the shapes of human beings, the fine and twisted shapes of the heart. It is good to have among us such men, such balancing monsters of love. Leonard Cohen, Beautiful Losers. Without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence. From these contraries spring what the religious call good and evil. Good is the passive that obeys reason. Evil is the active springing from energy. Good is heaven, evil is hell. William Blake, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Leonard Cohen was, and remains, an enigmatic figure, someone who resists easy categorization. In his life, he towed an unsteady line between rockstardom and a cerebral ascetic hermitude. His work, a shockingly coherent alloy of influences from Blake and Wordsworth to the Beat poets to Zen Buddhism and Frankian antinomianism, is shot through with a brilliance that led Bob Dylan to call him the #1 songwriter of our time. Yet he is perhaps best remembered in the popular imagination as the guy who wrote that one Shrek song, Hallelujah. Cohen was notoriously polygynous, a man who at 13 became a master of hypnosis so as to induce the family maid to remove all of her clothing. And yet later in life, he renounced his rapacious sexual habits to live as a celibate for 7 years in a Zen Buddhist monastery where he became an ordained monk. He has the poetic authority, the ethereal romantic touch of the 60s of a Dylan or a Simon. But unlike Dylan or Simon, the most influential part of his career came when he was well into his 70s, forced to embark on a world tour after discovering that, while he was marinating at the Mount Baldy Zen Center, his manager had been stealing him blind. Leonard, long before DreamWorks blockbusters, before world tours, before crowds of hundreds of thousands at the Isle of Wight, said that he wrote for inner-directed adolescents, lovers in all degrees of anguish, disappointed Platonists, pornography peepers, hair-handed monks, and papists. Leonard, of course, did not spring from Homer's forehead fully formed, but his talent was obvious to the higher-ups around him when he was still very young. As an undergraduate at McGill in the early 50s, he was folded into a small set of writers that was composed of men like Hugh McLennan, author of the seminal 1945 book Two Solitudes, F.R. Scott, McGill's Dean of Law, and Irving Layton and Louis Dudek, who pioneered new strains of modernism in poetry and laid the groundwork for Canada's burgeoning poetic tradition. At this point, the Montreal literary scene was still a tight, informal nexus. The men mostly met in the drawing rooms of their senior members. F.R. Scott, a man whose interests ranged from poetry to language to law to civil rights, was a great extrovert and entertainer who saw the gestation of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, Canada's first democratic socialist party, in his living room. The poets met in his home at 451 Clark Avenue in Westmount, a gilded suburb of Montreal. 451, as they called it, had once been a boarding house, but its 16 rooms were now scrubbed free of their former Victorian veneer thanks to Scott's wife, Marion, a prolific modernist painter who tore out the old ornate fireplace and replaced it with a more tasteful block of Bauhaus concrete. Certain vestiges of antiquity, however, could not be entirely disposed of. A Tiffany lampshade, worth somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000, sat quietly decomposing in the backyard for nearly a decade, and F.R. Scott installed a large cannonball from the Plains of Abraham, where Wolfe defeated Montcalm in the Battle of Quebec, in the front yard. It was here that Leonard came to know F.R. Scott's son, Peter. They were 2 of the 3 junior members of this group of 10 or 12 more seasoned men. Leonard was 19, and Peter was 5 years his senior, back in McGill to finish his dissertation after 2 years at Oxford. Peter, much later on, described the experience of being sandwiched between the eminence of his father above him and Leonard's rising brilliance beneath. Above all your shadow, Leonard, you were 5 years my junior, yet already envied by me for being a ladies' man with a car, while completing your first book of poems, already larger than life. Still, rivalries aside, the acquaintance blossomed into a full-fledged friendship. Leonard, longtime car owner that he was, taught Peter to drive on a trip down to the States. In 1955, Peter mustered up all of his 27-year-old seniority to scold Leonard for his extracurricular pursuits, saying, "Now, Leonard, you're a serious poet. Don't waste your time down there in those nightclubs with your guitar." Leonard, true to form, declined to take the advice. There was a great seriousness and intensity to the work of this period. We really wanted to be great poets, Leonard said. We thought every time we met it was a summit conference. We thought it was terribly important what we were doing. This was the eve of Allen Ginsberg's Howl, a period of reckoning with the horror of the Holocaust in Hiroshima, as the West struggled to strangle the strange new forces that had wriggled out of the Enlightenment's box of rationally ordered civilization. But it was also flavored with the spirit that inspired the birth of the United Nations and Bretton Woods, and later on, civil rights, Woodstock, and the free speech movement, flavored with the sense that individuals with reason, insight, and good sense could pick up the pieces and make things better. As Peter puts it, we were all inspired by the idea that the world was a terrible mess, that they were all teaching the wrong kind of poetry in the universities, and that we, with our poetry, were going to change things. At this point, poets were loosely divided into two camps, the raw and the cooked. The cooked were the East Coast people who came out of Harvard. This was F.R. Scott's camp. The raw were the beats. This was Irving Layton, who became Leonard's closest mentor. To draw lines between binaries that perhaps have no real intersection, I would venture to speculate that these two camps could have some rough parallel between what Scott would later call yin and yang in the evolution of Western culture. Yang is roughly exemplified by a sort of Enlightenment rationalism, that which is knowable and communicable, which can be touched by language, and so forth. Yin, then, would be the countervailing force of religion, mysticism, of poetic thought proper, that which resists propositional knowing. If Yang is enlightened urbanity, Yin is a primordial whispering in the wooded monasteries of the Dark Ages. Peter left Montreal for good in 1956, off to a career in the Canadian Foreign Service that would take him to hidden imperial loges in Viennese palaces, then all the way back around the world to a teaching post at UC Berkeley. There, he taught Dante, Virgil, and Dostoevsky, rallied faculty members in support of the free speech movement, wrote volume after volume detailing the CIA's involvement in various international drug wars, and struck up a serious friendship with the great Polish poet and Nobel Prize winner Czesław Miłosz. Leonard, meanwhile, was living the life of a veritable bohemian troubadour, holed up on the Greek island of Hydra in a whitewashed house with a Russian wrought iron bed, sampling varieties of pot, speed, and acid, writing a sexy, phantasmagoric novel called The Favorite Game and poems that would later appear in a collection entitled Flowers for Hitler. While Peter moved in a set that included figures like Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg, Leonard rubbed shoulders with Patti Smith, Lou Reed, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and, of course, Bob Dylan. I took the Yang path, and he took the Yin path, said Peter. I joined a university, and he became a rock star. The men lost touch after Peter first left Montreal, and for 40 years they had no contact. Leonard and Peter first reconnected in the late 90s when Leonard reached out for permission to use some of Peter's father's work on an upcoming album. What began as a logistical interaction soon burgeoned into a full-fledged reunion, which was well underway by the new millennium. When Peter published his long poem, Minding the Darkness, in the year 2000, Leonard flew to Berkeley from Los Angeles to hear him read it. Leonard immediately took to Peter's wife Rana, both of them westward wandering East Coast Jews with a serious interest in Buddhism. The three of them would share long meals, which Peter describes as being very, very intense, where Leonard would say the sorts of things that made you wish you were taping him. Once at a Greek restaurant in Los Angeles, Leonard horrified Rana's modern Orthodox sensibilities by ordering a huge dish of calamari. He and Peter gorged themselves while Rana looked the other way. This period of reacquaintance took place while Leonard was touring, and Peter and Rana attended 7 or 8 concerts as his guest, once flying all the way to London to hear him sing. Meeting again so much later in life, after walking 2 very different paths, the connection between the 2 men was undeniably profound. Once, while Peter and Rana were arriving in Los Angeles late to Sabbath, Peter left his yarmulke in the car. Leonard said, "Here, take mine." The next day at breakfast, Peter tried to return it. Leonard said, "No, keep it," and Peter still wears it every Sabbath. It was perhaps this divergence and reconvergence that made the renewed friendship so very special. By the time we knew each other again, he was no longer a rock star and I was no longer an academic. We were on the same ground, Peter said. Still, the men toyed with their yin-yang tension until the very end of their relationship. In October of 2016, just 19 days before his death, Leonard released his final album, You Want It Darker. It was the apotheosis, the coup d'éclat of the man sometimes called the godfather of gloom. In the title track, Leonard sings, Hineni, I'm ready, my lord. Hineni is Hebrew for Here I am, which is Abraham's response to God's demand that he sacrifice his son Isaac. Here, Leonard, like Abraham, prepares to bend to the will of a violent power that eludes his faculties of understanding. Rolling Stone describes the album as having a realistically grim, spiritually radiant, and deeply poetic worldview, generally spiked with a romantic thrum and an existential wink. At the same time, Peter was finishing his own book of poetry entitled Walking on Darkness, which he sent to Leonard by a friend, Rebecca de Mornay. In a hurry, before handing it off to Rebecca, he scribbled the following note in the jacket of the book. If you want it darker, this book is not for you. I have always wanted it lighter, and I think God does too. To Peter's great surprise, Leonard answered via email with a poem of his own, which may be the last published poem he ever wrote. Who says, I want it darker? Who says the you is me? God saved you in your harbor while millions died at sea. You and God are buddies. You know his wishes now. Here's broken Job all bloodied, who met him brow to brow. There is a voice so powerful, so easily unheard, that those that hear may hate it all, but follow every word. If you have not been asked to squat above the dead, be happy that you're deaf, not something worse instead. He will make it darker, he will make it light, according to his Torah, which Leonard did not write. The next day Peter replied, Who says I know God's wishes? I've not met brow to brow, never had a chance to glimpse him, and never hope to now. But we who were raised in harbors, while others burned from war, have been free to choose which voices made us what we are. To which Leonard responded, That was great fun. Be well, dear friends. Much love, Eliezer. On November 6th, Rebecca de Mornay, the longtime girlfriend of Leonard's, texted Leonard a photo of Peter at breakfast with her daughter Sophia. Leonard replied with another text, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. 23 hours later, he was dead. Peter said that he has known 3 great men in his life, Czesław Miłosz, the Nobel Prize-winning Polish poet, Daniel Ellsberg, the academic and activist who leaked the Pentagon Papers and started the Watergate scandal, and Leonard. I asked him what it was about these men that made them great, which was of course a question that was difficult to answer directly. Still, he did tell me that all 3 were able, by the intensity of their commitment to what they were doing, to sort of put a dent in history. Dan, with Watergate, was able to do so at the level of the immediate history that would show up, for instance, in the New York Times, but all 3 did work at the level of a deeper history, the sort of history that Peter calls ethogeny, the history of ideas, of our cultural evolution. After a lifetime of academic work and political activism, Peter says that this subterranean ethogeny is more interesting and more real to me than the ups and downs of historical evolution in the ordinary sense. Striking a Hegelian tone, he says that, my thesis is that ethogeny is dialectical, but hopefully evolutionary. Meanwhile, when something is progressing, something else is regressing. This is the sort of push and pull between yin and yang that he sees between the European Dark Ages and the Enlightenment. When we get off the path, as we are right now, then the dialectic kicks in and something happens to get us back on the path. He's not going to rush to proclaim the form that that dialectical movement will assume, but says that, throughout history, there have been periods of significant disruption. He declines to say whether we are in one right now. Such a view, which coheres with the post-Enlightenment notion of forward-moving cultural progression while challenging its linearity and rationality by introducing a dialectic that depends on forces that are mysterious and unknowable, has a tinge of the Weltanschauung of a William Blake or a Simone Weil, thinkers who accept the intermingling of good and evil as fundamental elements of the cosmos. Peter says that he himself isn't a Blakean. He prefers the yang of Wordsworth to Blake's yin, but both Leonard and Miłosz were deeply influenced by Blake. Their poetry wasn't just poetry, Peter said. They were both trying to articulate a Blakean universe, trying to put forth a dialectical view of the world in which evil played a part. Yang and yin. Ellsberg isn't known as a poet, but Peter groups him in with Leonard and Miłosz, despite his protestations. I call him, Dan, a believer. I call him a man of faith, Peter says. This Dan does not assent to. Dan says, No, Peter, I'm not a man of faith, I'm a man of hope. To which Peter responds, You put your finger on it, Dan. It was not a utilitarian calculus that led you to release the Pentagon Papers. To act from hope, you must have a belief in human beings that made you do it. Leonard's 2004 album, Dear Heather, included a title included a track entitled A Villanelle for Our Time, which was a poem by Peter's father, F.R. Scott, that Leonard set to music and recited. Repeated throughout are the lines, "Through bitter searching of the heart, we rise to play a greater part." F.R. Scott wrote the poem in a period of severe self-examination after he had renounced his pacifist convictions to persuade his left-wing political party to support the war against Hitler in 1939. I asked Peter why he thought Leonard might have chosen this particular poem, what it was about it that spoke to him. Leonard would like the word bitter, he said. There's pain, and that pain equips us to be more than we are. This darkness, this bitterness, seems to be a fundamental constituent of Leonard's genius. Peter said that great creativity is the right marriage of yang and yin. It would be reductive and silly to directly equate yin evil and yang good. What is significant here is the generative dialectic, which most certainly existed in Leonard's work, as in Peter's. In those long, free-ranging dinner conversations, evil came up a lot. Peter says that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm an optimist. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, a pessimist. What about Sunday? He shakes his hand in a classic gesture of ambivalence. I suspect Leonard may have been like me, he said. Still, even here, there were differences. His, Leonard's, worldview was very inclined to accept the givenness of evil. I tended to see evil as a problem to be coped with. But we were both coping with it. Of their final exchange, Peter said that, I think part of him did want it darker. It was so permissive. If the world is so dark, and there is no settled order that we need to live by, then you can live the life that Leonard lived. Peter, on the other hand, accepts the necessary presence of darkness without giving over to it entirely. My last word to Leonard was that you're talking about your reality as if it was reality, Peter says. I am suggesting that each of us respond to voices that shape the reality that we want to live in. Leonard also alluded to the quiet power of these voices when he offered the following reflection to The New Yorker in 2016, just before his death. I know there's a spiritual aspect to everybody's life, whether they want to cop to it or not. It's there, you can feel it in people. There's some recognition that there is a reality that they cannot penetrate, but which influences their mood and activity. What I mean to say is that you hear the Bat Kol, the divine voice. You hear this other deep reality singing to you all the time, and much of the time you can't decipher it. 50 years earlier, in Beautiful Losers, he had written, "A saint does not dissolve the chaos. It is a kind of balance that is his glory. Something in him so loves the world that he gives himself to the laws of gravity and chance." It is this interpenetration of light, dark, good, evil that makes Leonard's life, work, and ethics difficult to reckon with. And yet, perhaps, it is also this ability to reckon with dialectic that equips him, and the other greats, of which Peter is one, to cut to the heart of the ambiguity of our time, and to speak directly to our innermost desire, to be more than we are. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Leonard, Anthem. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Hi, Angie. Hi, Mariana, again. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Emily.
So this is the part where we talk to the writers, and then Carol and I do, and then we take some questions from the audience. So you have a question and answer block, and I think you're getting a chat about that now, about how to use that. So first of all, I wanted to say what I really loved about your essay, Mariana, is its gorgeous rendering of this relationship between Leonard Cohen and Peter Scott, how you make this come alive using excerpts from the manuscripts and interviews with Peter. The complicating of a simplistic notion of either man's approach to life, Peter is fully light or Leonard is fully dark, is so welcome. It's lovely to see how you treat the real ambiguities and the dialectics, the like dialogue part of this as you see it, as a kind of vision of life and of their visions of life. And then Angie, the work you do in drawing and writing this idea of home among so many dislocations, the literal ones in which your family moves over the course of your childhood pretty often, but also the metaphoric shifts between ways of being that you then render into cultural and political critique. I can't get out of my mind that shockingly powerful rendering of the broken pot that saves your mother's life. In a sense, her life in the family, in any case, in your family. I mean, it really kind of saves you because you wouldn't be you without it. And the poignant ambivalence of the last 2 or 3 cells. Home is where the sheets are scratchy and new, but also where you can rest, somewhere you call home, but the emphasis is on calling it home. So wonderful. Such good essays. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. Mariana, I love the way that you use language as you are talking about these masters of language. You repurpose some of their tropes as shorthand for concepts. You're doing what they're doing. Like Leonard, of course, did not spring from Homer's forehead fully formed, which is a play on, Athena springing fully formed from Zeus's head, or as we are told in the cleaned up version of that. And I just love this shorthand, the poetic shorthand that you use in a very historical essay, biographical essay. And, it's amazing that you were able to interview people and get them to speak so eloquently about their deepest motivations and what their real worldview. So it's really quite an accomplishment. Thank you. And Angie, I love the averted eyes of you. I mean, I've been a daughter, I've been there, I've done this old mom thing, and I'm a mother, so I recognize it when my daughter does that to me. And this is also sort of archaic and built into the human experience. So just starting out that way conveys how we feel about parental units, should we say. And yet then that you deepen the story, and it deepens and deepens and deepens until, this miraculous splitting of this boiling pot, which truly was a sign. And it sort of made me think right away of what Leonard Cohen talks about too. There is this force out there that is in all human beings, whether we acknowledge it or not. And that certainly wasn't part of the Cultural Revolution philosophy, as far as I know anyway. So these pieces work together very well, actually, I think, and at many different levels at once. So congratulations. I mean, this is wonderful writing and drawing, and you have captured your mother's and your grandmother's life. This is an amazing achievement. Congratulations. Congratulations to both of you. And now we can take some questions from other people.
So a question for Mariana. How did you discover the story of Peter and Leonard?
Yeah, so here's where my achievement seems a little bit less impressive. So Peter is my grandfather. And so I've actually grown up hearing bits and pieces about Leonard Cohen. He was kind of one of those like mystical figures where, I joke about how most people, only know him as the guy who wrote Hallelujah. And like, that was me until not too long ago. But Peter and Rana would go to concerts. And so, so it's always been, I'm really, anyone who knows me knows that I can't shut up about my grandpa. So, his relationship with Leonard is like one of the relationships that, I've been really interested in. I'm really interested in many of his relationships. So yes, that's how I found out about it. I didn't I can't even imagine how I would have found out about it otherwise if I had no family connection. That would be truly impressive. But no, it's been a part of my family for a long time.
All right. The next question is from our fellow nonfiction faculty member, John Reedy. Thank you for two extraordinary essays, Angie and Mariana. Could each of our authors please talk about their processes in researching and producing their pieces?
Angie, you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah, this piece kind of came out of I portrayed it as this one long conversation I had with my mom over the phone, but in reality, it was more like 14 disjointed conversations over the period of about half a year. My mom doesn't really love talking about her childhood, and I think I'd always found that to be kind of a failing when I was little. I always found her talking about the happy moments or when she was like this perfect daughter. And I think I resented her a little bit for it because she seemed so perfect to me. But recently, I think we had a little bit of a heart to heart, and she began to open up about the more difficult parts of her life and the reasons why she didn't really want to explore that. And I think a lot of it was just told from her point of view, and most of it was spoken in Mandarin. So I wrote it all down and then I transcribed it. And then I had to make it sound a little bit more lyrical because a lot of it was just told in between a lot of emotional sessions and stuff like that. And I did a little bit of research on the Cultural Revolution to kind of familiarize myself with that as well. But most of my knowledge was incredibly lacking. It was from 8th grade and just kind of the basic history book retelling of what went down in China. So I would really credit my mother for this piece, and it really is kind of like a love letter to her and to our relationship, even if sometimes I don't show it.
So for me, I mean, sort of similarly, like, as I said before, this came out of my relationship with my grandfather. And actually, that's really beautiful that you say that, Angie, because for me as well, like, you know, I never knew Leonard, but this essay means so much to me because it does feel like, you know, a letter to my grandfather and how much that relationship has been like just totally defining for my life. And so my process, you know, I'd love to come up here and say like, you know, all right, 2 months before I set out and I gathered every piece of information about Leonard Cohen on the internet. You know, it was one of those things that actually came together incredibly fortuitously. Like I was working, you know, so I wrote this essay actually as part of Professor Reddy's class. So that was sort of like the impetus. You know, I was at the time like really deep working on my senior thesis, and I was actually like, all right, like I don't have a lot of time. So like I gotta pick something that like the research is close, I can get it done. And then, so, you know, of course I call up my grandpa and, you know, we start talking, and it ends up just, I mean, it was one of those things where it just sort of all the pieces I feel like just fell into my lap, and then this story just like came together all of a sudden. And I think that's kind of like the scary thing about writing, because you want to think like you're in control and you're the one sort of like crafting it, but I don't know, there seems to be this element of it that's sort of just about like being ready to sort of like receive stuff, and then stuff will come, and then you hear the call, right? You hear the divine voice or whatever, and you put pen to paper. And so yeah, I mean, I wrote this sort of embarrassingly quickly. And it all sort of like came together all at once. And that was largely the only reason I was able to do that, was because I had 15 pages of notes from my grandpa. So all of the themes that, you know, I ended up like pulling out, those were sort of like the different threads of our conversation. And also some really helpful and awesome interviews that like reporters from like the Rolling Stone, the New Yorker did with Leonard Cohen. Those were something certain people, like their interviews, they have just all of these like gold nuggets, like the Russian wrought iron bed frame. I was like, who's finding this information? That's fantastic reporting. Anyway, so that was my process.
Okay, we have another question for you, Mariana. How was your mind changed from writing this piece?
Wow. Man, that's a great question. I mean, well, how has my mind changed? I mean, I can't say that I can pinpoint like a specific conceptual thing that like took off. I think that I would say that what felt really, really meaningful about writing this piece was the way that I was able to draw on a lot of like the reading and sort of thinking that I've been doing the last year that's felt really meaningful. So I think that I first started reading Simone Weil like about a year ago, and she has really interesting ideas about like, you know, she's sort of a Christian theological person-ish mystic, not really clearly categorize what she is, but you know, she has this view of the universe where like good and evil are sort of like working together. And I thought that you know, that has been very, very interesting to me. And so then, you know, being able to connect that to the conversations about yin and yang that I've been having with Peter since I was like, you know, since for the last like 4 or 5 years. And yeah, I would say that as opposed to, instead of changing my mind, it allowed me to sort of like synthesize a lot of things that I'd been thinking about. And I think that, you know, that's just what's so beautiful about writing, I think, is that all the time we're walking around in the world and like we're having thoughts about things and we're having emotional experiences. And a lot of that is really beautiful, but it's also like totally transient and ephemeral. And what was so wonderful about writing this piece is that, you know, you can attain a sort of like imperfect permanence, right? So like all of these thoughts I like dumped into this essay, and now I can go back and read it and that and share it with like people I love, and that feels really special. So
Great, thank you. All right.
I can go ahead.
Go ahead.
So there's a question for Angie. Could you talk about your influences for a piece like this? Which authors in fiction, poetry, or graphic novels or graphic memoirs do you draw from for a piece like this?
It's a great question. I actually have to admit that I wasn't particularly reading graphic novels until Rick Moody's class, which I took last semester, which is also the class that I wrote this piece in. He introduced me to all of like the basic, not basic, but like fundamental pieces of literature, graphic literature, such as Mouse by Art Spiegelman and a lot of Chris Ware's work. It was after reading Mouse that I was kind of motivated to take all of this information that I acquired from all these conversations I've been having and compile it into a piece. I felt like there was something that art could do that the words maybe couldn't, especially in terms of just like these subtle relationship gestures, and also just showing what places look like instead of necessarily describing everything. I don't know. I think there's a balance that can be struck there. And of course, there's also Tilly Walden who made this incredible piece called Spinning. She's a very young graphic novelist, but she has done so much work. She's incredibly prolific, and it's all very, very poignant. So I would probably say her as well.
Okay. We have another complicated, somewhat detailed question for Mariana. You wrote at one point how Peter refrained from answering your question as to whether or not we are presently in one of these moments of disruption. What are your thoughts regarding our present and social moment? Are we disrupted? How do we heal?
wow, that's a really wonderful question. Thank you to whoever asked that question. Yeah, it's funny. I've been having like an ongoing conversation with one of my friends about like decadence. There's this book that just came out called The Decadent Society, and you know, and in it, you know, this the author makes a point that like, you know, try to, you know, think about like who the great intellectuals of right now are, right? So like in the past, like, you know, in whatever the 19th century, certain people were able to pinpoint like, okay, it's, you know, it's Darwin, it's Dostoevsky, it's Tolstoy, it's Marx, you know, there were these leading figures who were like able to piece everything all together. And we're sort of like, okay, like who is it now? Like Malcolm Gladwell, like Zizek, like, you know, who are these people? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that, you know, Mark Zuckerberg counts. Like, anyway, so that, I mean, I think that is like a genuine question. Like there does seem to be some sort of like, not only do we have all of these like, you know,
terrible like social, political, global problems, but also like the state of our culture seems to maybe be like on a bit of but at the same time, I think it's really difficult, like when you're in a moment, to actually gauge like what's going on, especially right now. I mean, we've just had like all of this crazy stuff happen. So, you know, I'm not sure. I'm not going to like pronounce like the state of we are at this point in the evolution of our culture. I mean, I do think, what I think is really interesting though, is Peter's thoughts about sort of like yin and yang. And like, I think, to speak very abstractly, like, you know, we're in a very yang moment, right? Like we, even like in universities, like we are very scientized. Like we think that we can sort of like figure everything out using sort of rigorous quantitative methods and draw a map of the whole universe. And, you know, in a certain sense that may be true. But, you know, other modes of knowing, you know, I'm big fan of Heidegger. So sort of like a more maybe like primordial apprehension of being, you know, sort of like poetic, I don't want to say mystical because that's a little blah, but, you know, sort of a more poetic, complicated relationship to, you know, to the natural world and to human relationships. I think that those things have receded. And, you know, what the ultimate effect of that, I mean, it's sort of like impossible to say. But I think that in that sense, right, like I think that we are in a very sort of like yang dominant moment. Not sure if that answered that question, but great question. Thank you.
Well, I know that we're in a moment of great writing. There's a lot of wonderful writing going on right now. Okay, Emily, do you want to take another question?
I can do that. Again, for Angie, and I think I can actually combine two questions here. One of them is whether the art came before the text or the text before the art, or did they kind of come together? And what was the initial decision to use or to create a graphic essay? How did that happen?
Those are really great questions. The art and the writing definitely evolved together. I think that the graphic novel form is a really unique kind of intersection where the words and art support each other and can't be told without each other. A lot of times I feel like the misconception is that if you draw and you write, then you can automatically do a graphic novel, but I found it immensely difficult to kind of enter the genre in the beginning. I think there was a lot to unlearn about, you know, writing all these descriptions and then kind of tossing that all out once I did the drawing, because it was just, you know, telling the same thing, and all of the kind of methods that I had to kind of observe in different manuscripts and different graphic novels that did find a way of communicating these super emotional moments. And so I had to write a script, but as I was writing the script, I was also describing what I would draw in the panels. And so while the writing did technically come first, everything was happening simultaneously in my head, or I would like to think. I would tell myself that. And I'm sorry, was the second question something about what the genre affords?
No, it was more, how did it occur to you? I'm sort of rephrasing the question. How did it occur to you to make this a graphic essay? I mean, what was the initial impulse graphic, or when in the process did you say, oh, right, I need to draw this?
I have to admit, a lot of it came from the fact that I had to make a graphic piece for Rick's class. And I was thinking this would be a really important story to tell. But I found as I went through that there was so much that could be conveyed through facial expression that can't necessarily come through across tone. I found this in particular when speaking to my mother, a lot of things she might say, particularly when she spoke in English, that kind of comes across as harsh or kind of has a different meaning. I think a lot of times, this is kind of a digression, but when I was little, all of my friends would think that my mother was a little bit stern or harsh. but that was only because her tone didn't quite come across the same when she spoke Mandarin versus when she spoke English. And so, like, similarly, I think that when she's saying some things, I can clarify what that might mean or how she might be intending it through the visuals in the same way that tone clarifies it in language.
All right. One last question for Mariana. Mariana, how did your own faith journey intersect with the writing of your essay? Nothing personal.
Wow, I really gonna this out to 75 people right there. No, I mean, it's an important question. I mean, I think that, yeah, I think part of why this piece was significant is because, you know, the things that I was writing about are things that are deeply resonant for me. And the reason I'm so interested in them is because I found these ideas to be like absolutely instrumental for helping me to like understand the universe and navigate my own life. And I think that, you know, it's, I don't know, it's sort of interesting because I'm writing this is all happening, you know, almost exactly a year after the beginning of the pandemic. And my life was really different a year ago. I mean, I would say that this piece is sort of like a milestone of a journey that I think started in earnest a year ago. You know, I went home for quarantine and you know, everything, my life was sort of like turned upside down, and I would like go to the back room of my house every morning with like a peanut butter smoothie at like 8 a.m. and I would read Heidegger for like 4 or 5 hours. And I've never done that in my life before. I mean, had that kind of sort of like intense engagement with like one thinker. And I heard the black coal, like I heard something. And that was, I think, the beginning for me term. I don't really like it, to be honest, but sort of exploring the possibility that there are dimensions of reality that are difficult to capture with sort of like ordinary propositional knowledge. And so yeah, I think a lot to came out, I think, sort of subtly in this piece, but it certainly is an expression of my own sort of like grappling with the God question, you know, yin and yang, like Blake, what's going on out there? So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Emily, do we have time for any more?
We do. We have time at least for 2, I think. And I've got a question again that I'm going to combine a couple that has to do with I think it is a corollary question about how, I think for both of you, how what you studied during your years at college intersects with these particular projects. And particularly, I think, Mariana, you're a physics major, right? Is that correct?
I do physics and philosophy. So there's the philosophy side of it that like maybe makes this make a little bit more sense.
Yeah. So the what it is how do you see what it is you study and what it is that interests you and what you concentrate in as crossing through or evincing itself in these particular projects?
I am sorry to disappoint, but I feel like my answer will be fairly obvious since I study literary arts at Brown, and I also study illustration at RISD. So it kind of connects seamlessly in the graphic novel. But I would say that in both, there is this examination of humanities and humanism, where especially at Brown, there's such a focus on empathy and kind of understanding these kinds of points of view, which I feel like is also present, especially in your piece, Mariana. And so I think that there is this really nice balance of learning what it means to understand others and learning how to express that in words and images if that happens to be the medium. So yeah, mine is a little bit more obvious, but I am curious about physics.
Yeah, I mean, Boy, it's a stretch. I wish I could tell you that like one night in the rock while solving some differential equation, I was like, the bat coal, like Leonard and Peter, it's right up there on the chalkboard. But no, I mean, in any practical way whatsoever, physics doesn't have a whole lot to do with the stuff I'm doing here. I mean, I think that the motivation for me for wanting to do physics and wanting to do philosophy is that, these are both disciplines that are trying in like a very, well, philosophy maybe less so, physics in a very structured and systematic way to sort of like get a handle on like, what is the universe made out of? What is going on out here? And I think that, that is a question that, you can follow by doing science. And I think you can also sort of like follow by thinking about these like great artists and thinkers who are putting forward like their own sort of like theories or views about, what is it that's out there? What are these fundamental forces that are like shaping human life and human activity? And I think also like studying science has given me a real appreciation for, one, the incredible things that science can do. I mean, physics is really, really beautiful. It's really beautiful. But also sort of like what it can't do and like why we need to sort of be able to think about things in other domains. So I think, I've had the really unique opportunity to be able to like study those things next to each other. And I'm just really grateful for that.
All right, we have another question for both of you. Now that each of you has received this honor, do you have intention to continue to share your skill and talent in this way? Congratulations to both. So, like, what next? What's going to happen?
I feel like this is a compliment disguised as a question.
Right.
Well, thank you, first of all. And I would love to continue doing this. I think graphic essays are just such a beautiful thing that, right now they're experiencing a growth in the publishing industry. So that's kind of fortuitous for me. If I, can get these out in the world, but I have so many stories I would love to tell and explore. And, even Miranda's, your essay, it's so incredibly beautiful in the way that it touches upon so many things that internally, but also kind of projects into the world externally and sheds light on just so many different, facets of our existence. And so I would love to explore that venue more as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, this, I really didn't see this coming. And I think that it's been absolutely like one of the most meaningful parts of this year. I think taking Professor Reddy's class and reconnecting with like, how much I just really do like writing things. I almost was an English nonfiction concentrator. I was very, very close to going down that path and then decided to go down a different path and sort of like thought I was done for a little while. And then, I think that, not to delve too much into like my life plan, but part of my epiphany a year ago is that I really want to pursue an acting career. Crazy. But part of that for me has meant wrestling with, the reality that I'm going to need to sacrifice at least to some degree, like my academic passion stuff. And so I think that, writing this piece and other pieces this semester, working on my senior thesis has made me realize like, I don't have to stop doing this just because I'm going down a different path for a while. In fact, I think the beautiful thing about writing is that one, you can take it with you anywhere you go. And two, it's actually really informed by like having other experiences out in the world. So I guess to answer that question, I just feel really grateful for this whole thing because I think it's given me, it's sort of been like a confirmation that this is something I'm going to keep doing and I want to keep doing. I kind of have to keep doing. I'm like, I can't stop. Like there's so much I feel like I want to think about and say. And so, yeah.
Okay. Thank you both. All right.
I can ask
Okay.
another question. We still have a little more time. So this one is again for both of you. How do you two view the importance of love and perhaps even the lionization of your loved ones on your ability to craft these pieces? Was it difficult to share these intensely intimate stories?
Wow, this is an incredible question. I think it's a very cheesy answer, but a very true answer to talk about the importance of love and the importance of love as paying attention. I think in Greta Gerwig's movie Lady Bird, there's this line about how paying attention is a form of love. And I mean, I love Lady Bird. I always write about mother-daughter relationships, and that is just perfectly up my alley. But I think it's true. And I think that there's so much that can be shown of one's appreciation or one's relationship with something, be it subject or a person, through the way that you can describe them and the way that you can discuss something and portray that. And in terms of sharing intimate moments and if it was difficult or not, I have to say I am intensely comfortable with sharing things that I probably shouldn't share with everybody, but I love writing about the most intensely personal things because I think in that there is this universality. So maybe I should write less of that personal stuff and kind of filter it out, but that is something I've been thinking about.
I mean, Angie just sort of like hit it on the nose when she said the thing about love and paying attention. That's been all I've been like blabbing about for a while. Yeah, I think that it gives you a window. And I think what's really impressive is that, you know, obviously we both have this really intense personal connection to, you know, the people we're writing about. What's crazy is people like Edmund Morris, you know, who write these like absolutely monumental biographies of like, you know, Teddy Roosevelt or something. It's like, he didn't know him, like he just had to go and get all that stuff. So anyway, maybe someday. But yeah, this idea of paying attention and paying tribute. And I think like, you know, one thing whenever I've had conversations with my grandfather, it always feels like I'm getting thrown into this world. Like he's always referencing all of these people and writers and events that like I just have no context for and I don't understand. And I'm always like writing stuff down and like Googling it later and reading stuff. And that sort of, I think that I wanted this essay to sort of like be a slice of that. And so I just like wanted to like create this experience of mashing all of these different references together. Because that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about talking to my grandfather. So again, like, I think it's a really incredible feeling to be able to sort of like give your love for somebody, put it in a sort of like more objective form that like can maybe be shared with other people.
I think Emily and I get to thank you both for
Oh my gosh, so much.
a wonderful evening and for sharing your work so eloquently with all of us. This has just been a wonderful Shearer event. And, you know, every year I've been going to these for a long, long time because I remember walking across the green and meeting Beth and she was telling me what had happened to Casey. So I've been to many of these events and each one is meaningful in a very different way. And tonight's is intensely personal and intimate and powerful. And I really thank you both. This has been a wonderful experience. And I thank the Shearer family and Ruth Goldway and everyone who has made this event so wonderful as part of Brown every year. Thank you. Thank you.
And see, I have the opposite. I'm brand new. So this is my first Shearer. And so I can't imagine a better initiation into this event than the way this has happened. And I am grateful to Beth for putting it together, to the Shearers. And obviously, it's pretty amazing. My dog also thinks so. Sorry about the puppy. Thank you very, very much for your work and your dedication to the process. So I think the next thing that happens is I say, thank you all for your questions and to Mariana and Angie for their work. And now for some closing remarks from Derek Shearer.
My name's Derek Shearer. I'm Casey Shearer's father. And I want to thank everybody who put together today's program, and to the staff of Brown, and particularly Beth Taylor, for continuing the Shearer Writing Awards. It's an honor to Casey, as well as an honor to Brown and its excellent writing program. I particularly want to congratulate the two winners today. Mariana, your essay on the friendship of Leonard Cohen and Peter Dale Scott resonated with me. I've been a fan of Leonard Cohen's music since I was in college, and I still tear up when I watch Kate McKinnon's rendition of Hallelujah, which she sang on Saturday Night Live in her role as Hillary Clinton. And I actually have some things in common with Peter Dale Scott. We both wrote for Ramparts magazine in the 1970s. We both opposed the Vietnam War. And we've both been longtime friends with Daniel Ellsberg, although I think Peter holds him in slightly higher esteem than I do. I have a bit more nuanced view of Daniel. Angie, your manga about your life and your family growing up and experiences in China also resonated with me. My grandson, Vigo, Casey's nephew, has been in Mandarin immersion since he was in kindergarten and is pretty fluent in Chinese. I've also taught Chinese students at Occidental, and some of them have shared with me their experiences, their family experiences, particularly of the Great Cultural Revolution. I know what an awful time it was for many in that Maoist period. And to remind me, I have on my desk at Occidental a piece of Maoist kitsch ceramic. It's a sculpture which shows a professor on his knees with a sign in front of him renouncing his views, and standing next to him is a red guard with a stick. So Angie, a wonderful, wonderful and moving piece. And Vigo will be reading it because he's a great fan of mangas. And to thank both of you for your wonderful writing, I'm going to be sending you a copy of Casey's collected essays called Case in Point. These are articles and columns that he wrote at Brown, because it was at Brown that he found himself as a writer, as I think both of you are doing. And I want to wish both of you the most success in the future. And I want to thank again everybody for putting together this program. Thank you.